Hello and welcome to the Education Connections webinar, Creating a Safe and Reflective Space in the Classroom, Facing History's Approach to Constructive Dialogue and Critical Thinking. We are delighted to be joined by Jocelyn Stanton from Facing History and Ourselves. My name is Lindsay Massoud and I will be moderating today's session. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's been able to join us today for our 17th Education Connections webinar and the second event of this summer. Welcome to both our Education Connections members and others who are with us today, including any teachers working with Facing History and Ourselves. We're so glad you all could be here, and we thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We'll begin today's session with a brief introduction, including an overview of Education Connections. Then we'll hear from Jocelyn Stanton. Following and throughout her presentation, we'll have some time reserved for questions and comments from participants. We'll be monitoring questions as they come in, and we encourage you to send along any thoughts or questions that come to mind during the presentation using the questions box in the GoToWebinar window. During today's session, we'll also be posting some polling questions related to both your background and today's topic. Once results are in, we'll post them for you to view. We'll be doing some interactive activities during the webinar, but we also invite you to chat further about today's topic by joining us on Twitter. You can use the hashtag EdConnects, EDCONX, to participate in the conversation with our staff as well as your fellow educators. For those of you who may be new to Education Connections, we wanted to briefly introduce you to the community and resources available. Education Connections is an initiative of the Center for Applied Linguistics and is hosted on the University of Oregon's Obaverse platform. It's a free online community providing access to a wide range of resources and bringing educators together to collaborate around implementing high-quality, standards-based instruction with all students, and especially English learner students. There are many different ways to participate. You can share ideas and ask questions in the discussion forums, find resources to use in your classroom, participate in live events such as this one, and read Tuesday's tips and Friday's fun facts that are shared in the forums every week. Anyone is welcome to join, so we invite you to sign up today if you're not already a member. As a reminder, the Education Connections team will post a video archive of this webinar, a PDF of the PowerPoint, and links to resources related to today's topic. To access these resources, log on to Education Connections and click on the Live Events tab. Now on your screen, you'll see some polling questions regarding your background, and we'll post these results as they come in. The first question, what is your current position? Okay, so it looks like we largely have ELL, ESOL, and bilingual teachers and coordinators or administrators, as well as a few general education teachers and instructional coaches, as well as some who don't fit into any of these categories. So we want to welcome all of you. We're very glad you're here. The next question, with what grade levels do you primarily work? Great. So we have a lot of people across the spectrum, including college, a little bit more in pre-K to 5. We are excited for today's topic. Think it'll be useful across the grade level, so it's nice to see a good spread. So this final question, we're curious, Facing History and Ourselves is an organization that we've had a lot of contact with, and we've really enjoyed some collaboration with them and see links between our work. But we are curious if any of the participants today know them or if it's a new organization to you. Okay, so we have 10% quite familiar and everyone else it's new to me. So that's actually exciting because we think they have a lot to offer in terms of something. They offer a different perspective than we do at the Center for Applied Linguistics, and one that I think is really complementary to the work that we do. And so we're very excited to be able to introduce them to you, as well as Jocelyn Stanton in particular as today's presenter. So I'm very excited for you to get to learn a little bit more about them and hear the suggestions that Jocelyn has for your classroom. So we will now turn it over to Jocelyn.
Great, thanks everybody. I'm going to get ready to share my screen with you. Thanks for joining us on this, what is in Boston, where I am, a hot Wednesday in the middle of the summer. And I'm thrilled that so many of you are just coming to get to know us better. So I'll tell you a little bit about Facing History and who I am, and then I'll get right into the topic. So to start, as Lindsay said, and thank you so much, Lindsay and Cal, for having us. My name is Jocelyn Stanton. I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, but I work at Facing History and Ourselves, which is all over the country. We have our headquarters here in Boston, but we're have offices around from San Francisco to Memphis, Chicago to Cleveland to Toronto to London. We're pretty well represented around the world. And we're thrilled to work with different organizations trying to meet students in different ways where they are. I started as an English and ESL teacher out in California and then moved back to the East Coast where I'm from and continued teaching, really focusing on EL students in the humanities and in English classes, and was so compelled by the curriculum that I used in my classroom from Facing History that I ended up joining the staff. And so here I am, and happy to speak with all of you. So the topic for today is a little different. It's not, sort of a content-based session necessarily. It's really about strategies and thinking about how we organize classrooms. At Facing History, we talk a lot about this idea of creating a safe and reflective classroom, and we do that really for so many different reasons, but one of the main ones really is for the subheading, to have constructive dialogue and critical thinking. And we really believe that until you have a space where students feel safe to be themselves and are able to be reflective, that they're actually not going to be able to have the type of dialogue that we want them to have in education and be able to think critically and ask hard questions and debate difficult answers without that basis. So that's really why we're starting there today. So a little bit about how we think about education, how we organize our curriculum. We have what we call a scope and sequence, or it's our approach to teaching history and literature, which is really mainly what we focus on, though we have ideas for other disciplines as well. And we start up here where you see the words the individual and society. So as we're organizing a unit or a semester or a course, we really always want to start with issues around identity. Who are we? Who am I? What are the different things that make up who I am? What are the things about me that are chosen? What are the things about me that might be assigned to me by others or by society? What is my interaction with society? How does that affect the person I'm becoming? We start there, one obvious reason is because adolescents, kids that's their most favorite topic to talk about. But we also start there because we think it's important for students to think about who they are as they're changing, as they're developing opinions, as they're becoming agents in their own life and in society. They need to actually learn how to become self-aware, how to think about the choices they're making and how who they're becoming is influenced by the different things around them. And they have power to change that and enhance that. From identity and issues around the individual, we go to groups, and we go to something we call we and they. We look at groups in society. We look both at sort of how society groups are created, who's in, who's out, what does exclusion mean, how does who I am individually affect how I might see that group over there, how does it affect how they might see me, how do these issues around we and they affect the choices we make in our country, affect the choices I make in my daily life, in my classroom, in my family, in my community. So again, we're sort of really having students think deeply about issues around human behavior. From there, we go into a case study, and that might be a very deep historical moment. It might be a piece of literature. It's usually a case study that's a pretty awful, frankly, example of we and they, sort of we and they gone wrong to the worst degree. We started 40 years ago, really looking at the Holocaust as our main case study. So, and we've expanded there from other examples of genocide, violence, racism, issues where people are divided and something major happens. And we don't just look at sort of like, oh, this thing happened and how awful is this, but really what happened? How did something get to this place? What were the choices that were made by individuals, groups, and nations that led to these events? What were the choices that were made during these events? What are the roles that people played? What are the options they had? So what did it mean to be a bystander? What did it mean to be a rescuer? What did it mean to be a resistor? What did it mean to be a victim? What did it mean to be a survivor? What did it mean to be a perpetrator? And we really want students to think about that deeply as they're moving out of the case study into issues of judgment and legacy, so that we can more authentically think about how do we understand history? How do we judge it from our very far distance from it? And what are the legacies that we're all still living out that might connect back to these histories that we just learned about? And then from there we get to what we call choosing to participate, which is really coming back to the present day and having students think about, okay, I've thought about this moment, this really deep historical or moment or this piece of literature, and what does that tell me about myself? What does it mean? What choices do I have? What role do I want to play? When might I be acting like a bystander? When maybe could I do something differently and be what we call an upstander? What does it look like to participate both in my daily life, in my school, in my community, and also in my nation? And really our goal at the end of the day is civic agency. And so we want our students to think about the different ways they can participate in the world around them. The other way we frame our pedagogy is through this triangle. So if you look at the center, we have the words informed civic responsibility. That's really our end goal, that we want our students, as I just mentioned, to think about how they participate, when they might participate, and want them to do it in an informed way and in a responsible way. And so to get there, what we've found through our research is that students need to be engaged in 3 different ways in their academic time. So the first one is obvious. It's what everyone talks about. It's intellectual rigor. We need to give them texts and readings and stories that push them, that are thoughtful, that are complex, that are intellectually rigorous, right? We need to prepare them for the tests they're going to take and also prepare them for the different readings they're going to have throughout their lives in college and work and beyond. But then in addition to that, we need to engage them in 2 other ways. And one is the emotional engagement piece, that when we connect with something emotionally, we remember it differently, we think about it differently, it might make a different imprint on our thoughts and our choices moving forward. And then we also want to give students time to reflect about ethics. What does it mean to do the right thing? What are the different choices in front of me? And they're complex. Most things in our life aren't going to be a simple answer, and that's true in history as well. And so how do we sit and let students sort of be moral philosophers in the classroom, let them reflect ethically on the moments they're studying? And when those 3 things happen, within the course of a unit, it might be, you do each of them every week, you may do them every day, you hopefully do them at least throughout the course of 4 to 6 weeks, that students actually leave a classroom experience with better sense of their civic responsibility, more agency to act in their life. So that's sort of who we are. It's a lot to throw at you. I'm going to end with this, and I'll take a couple questions just about anything I've said before I move into some of our activities. So from these 2 models, what we've developed is this thing called the reflective classroom. And so why have we gotten there? Well, again, as I've said, to really foster this deep inquiry, to let students connect history to their own life and to contemporary events that are happening, and to nurture their participation, they need space to reflect. And so I'm going to actually skip ahead to, well, I'll read you this quote, which I think is actually super powerful and talks a lot about what we're doing and what I'll be talking about today. We often think we've learned a lot from this philosopher, Hannah Arendt, who some of you may know, who talks about the essence of being human. And she said, the things of the world become human for us only when we can discuss them with our fellows. We humanize what is going on in the world and in ourselves only by speaking of it. And in the course of speaking of it, we learn to be human. And so if you think about the title of this webinar, Constructive Dialogue and Critical Thinking, that we actually think the act of speaking together, of having these important dialogues, of having complex texts to discuss together, actually is not just a way for students to learn it. They will be learning doing that. They'll be understanding the world better through those conversations. Okay, so what is this reflective classroom I've talked about? So we've done a lot of research on this, and we've practiced a lot with our own teachers and our scholars. And so really these 8 points are what we think makes up a reflective classroom. And feel free just to start typing in questions as I talk, and I'll answer them at the end of this. So the first one is just mutual respect from teacher to student. That might be just really obvious, but the idea that students need to know that who they are and who they have represented themselves to be is going to be respected in the classroom, and that's going to be expected from teacher to student to teacher, and student to student. We think a lot about space in the classroom. If you're angling for a classroom that has constructive dialogue, how have you arranged your desks so that those kinds of conversations can happen? It doesn't make sense to have students talking to each other's backs, right? So how do you actually move your classroom throughout a week or a period to communicate the kind of conversations, the kind of community you're creating? The third is just a culture of questioning, the idea that we're not expecting easy answers, we're not actually hoping for them, that we want students to keep questioning, to asking more and more and more, that things aren't black and white. Often with the histories we look at, some people like to talk about sort of evil and good, and it's as simple as just, this was a case of evil, and that actually there's so much more going on that we need to uncover and uncover and uncover. We use a lot of silence in the classroom, which we'll do a little bit of today. The idea that there's moments for students, and this is, I found especially true as a teacher of English language learners, where silence is really powerful, giving students time to process, respecting it, giving them space to think about what they're thinking about, and giving them different ways to experience silence together as a community as they're processing. Really emphasizing student-to-student discussions. As you all know, those of you who are in the classroom, it's incredibly hard to get students to talk to each other and not always go through you as the conduit. So really, again, framing your classroom physically and strategically and structurally so that students are actually encouraged and forced to have conversations together. Constantly connecting the content to students' lives, to the world today, finding ways to make sure that they are both interacting with the history, but making sure it's relevant to them, right? Why are we studying this? And finding different avenues to do that, both simple and complex. And the last two are just really about diversity, both in how students express their learning, so what assessments look like, what products students are producing, the way they're being asked to demonstrate that they've mastered a skill or a concept, and also making sure that there's space for many different ideas in the classroom. And I think one thing we would never, we never want students to pick up on, okay, well, here's clearly the bias of the teacher and the bias of the, most of the students in my classroom, and so I'm just gonna go towards that way. But really expecting and hoping that people will really have very different views into those kinds of conversations, and being able to say what you think are encouraged. So that was a lot. I'm going to stop here and just take any questions that people have before I move on to activities. What did I say that you want to know more about? And I see I have one question about the word I used, upstander. Can you describe, the person asked, can you describe the role and responsibilities of an upstander? It's a great question. It's a long question, I think. I'll start by using the word. So our students picked up a word, actually, that Samantha Power used in a book she wrote many years ago called A Problem from Hell, and she was writing about bystanders and saying, what would it look like for people to stop standing by and start standing up? And so that term upstander became kind of coined, and students, you probably know, are using it all over the place. And we actually had some students, I think in New Jersey, lobby the Merriam-Webster dictionary to get it in the dictionary. They were not successful as of yet. But so the roles and responsibilities, I think the idea is that there's so many ways to answer that, but I think when we talk to students about choosing to participate, it's really letting them think about, when do I see things happening, injustice, issues around we and they that don't feel right. It could be as simple as one student, it could be as simple as sharing a book with someone in your classroom who doesn't have one, right? And when do I feel responsible that I want to impact this situation with my choices? So I don't think we have students leave with sort of, these are your responsibilities and you need to fulfill them. It's really that, let's wake up to the world. Let's think carefully about the choices we're making, who we are, who do you want to be, how are your choices impacting that vision you have for yourself? And who do you see, what do you see, understand about our democracy? What do you understand about our society? And what are the ways that you can influence that? And what are the ramifications if you choose not to? So I don't think I fully answered your question, but I think what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that, again, it's this culture of questioning, that there aren't necessarily full answers, but there's also we want students to keep asking. So I'm looking in the question box. My question box is so small, so I don't know if any of the other presenters know how to make it bigger. I'm trying to read the questions quickly, but they're only
you can. There's a little box with an arrow. So if you click on it, you can pop it out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so are the components of a reflective classroom integrated or independent from one another? They're integrated. They really don't work without another. If you only did space for diverse viewpoints, I don't think you could get to the other things. So really, they're a package deal. And the last question someone had was, with different setups, we can also think of pairs, groups, and rows. Do you find there are more creative, out-of-the-box ways to set up a classroom to facilitate these discussions? I do, and actually we have different examples on our website of different, we have ways to group kids in fours and have them face each other in a circle of four. We have ways to have kids do 2 lines and almost move down like a speed dating kind of thing. There's ways to do a whole class discussion. There's ways to we do actually have a variety of different ways to think about organizing your students, and I'll get to some of that, and then at the end of this presentation I'll also I will have some links to more strategies. Okay, well, I would love to keep going and practice a couple with you. What I'm gonna do, and it's always hard to do these things online, and it's even harder when you only have a short amount of time, but I'm just gonna try and give you a taste of what some of these things might look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to an activity. We're going to try and do it online. It's going to require some participation from everyone who can hear me and who can use a mouse, who has a computer in front of them and isn't listening on their phone. And what we're going to do is we're going to read a text, and it's a text we often use, and it's a text about identity. It's an adolescent young woman who's talking about herself. And I'm going to ask you, as a way both to sort of model a strategy we use to think about silence, and modeling sort of a way to have student discussions, and modeling this culture of questioning, I'm going to ask you to read the text and respond to it. But it gets a little more complicated than that. So what we're going to do is an activity that we call big paper or silent conversation, and it's really a wonderful activity. It involves taking a text, a picture, any kind of thing you want students to investigate, and putting it in the center of either a big piece of chart paper or an 8.5 by 11 paper, depending on what you have around you, and you ask the students to silently have a conversation about that text with each other. You might give them question prompts, you might not, but the idea is that in silence they're going to write down their thinking, and as someone writes one thought, they might react to it and say, oh yes, I agree, that does sound like an interesting. So if the question was, the question I'm going to ask you is, this young woman, Jennifer Wang, how does she define herself? And so you might write, and you'll see this in a second, I think she's really defining herself based on what others think of her. And somebody else might say, well, actually, I think it's something different. I think she's saying this. What I love about this activity is that it's a way to equalize the playing field, so the loudest kids in the classroom don't get the most voice. With my EL students, what I often did is I would give them first, I would do this activity in stages, so I would first have them read the text and respond privately just for themselves, both to kind of practice language so they don't feel like they're on the spot when they go to the silent conversation, but also just to give them a little more time to process and think together. But today we're going to kind of jump into it just because we're adults and and we have a shorter time period. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to click on a document that's currently in the chat box. And that document is going to bring you to something I'm going to pull up right here. It's a reading called Orientation Day. So here's, if you can still see my screen, what you're going to do is read it, and then I want you to try and comment on the document. If you know Google Docs, this will be no problem, and if you don't, it's okay. You can either practice or you can just type your thoughts in the question box. But if you want to do a comment, you can click on Insert and then just scroll down to Comment, and then you can make a comment. Though it's not actually. Let's see. A comment box should pop up. Try to see if it's happening for me. There it is. And I would say this is the title. So what I want you to comment on is, as you read this piece, what is Jennifer saying about her identity? How does she describe herself? Let's end there. So how does Jennifer describe herself? What shapes her identity? Let's just go with that. Does anybody have any questions about the assignment before we do this?
Well, real quick, Jocelyn, I'm not sure if you have open. I know we had a couple versions of the Google Doc that we were working with, and
is it the wrong one?
on your screen. I think if you click on the one that that Joanna posted the link to in the chat.
Okay, it's different. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, because there are a bunch of people in there. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, great. No problem. Great. Thank you so much for letting me know.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll write the questions up here.
And as a note while she's writing the questions, if anyone's having trouble accessing the Google Doc or commenting there, feel free to post a comment or a question within the questions box within GoToWebinar.
Oh, oops. And I know it can be tricky. It's tricky to type on the Google Doc because I can see some of you. If you can make a comment on the side, that's a little bit easier both for you and for other readers. And the way to do that is to just click on Insert at the top bar and then click down on Comment. But it's okay if you also want to type in the document, just type at the end, and you can write some thoughts down there too. You can just go to the next page. I'm glad to see people are trying. So just thank you all so much for trying this out. I know it's tricky to work with a new system. As you're reading, try and see there's a bunch of different comments on the side of the document, and the ones there's different names, and some people are writing in the document, which is fine too at this point. If you could just try and respond to one, just to sort of get the feeling of what it's like to have the conversation, that would be great, and then we'll come back to the other page in a minute. And if anyone wants just to type their thoughts in the question box, that is also completely fine. Okay, so the last thing I want you to do, or I'll just even, you know what, let's skip that. Let's all head back over to the, I'm going to, if I share my screen, I'm not sure if I'm forcing you all out of the Google Doc, but I'm heading back over to the presentation. So if you all go back to your GoToWebinar page, if you're not there already, we'll come back. I'm just going to check one time to make sure people aren't lost. Is there a way for people to raise their hand or just tell me they sort of know where we are?
Yeah, people can raise their hand if they're back in GoToWebinar. There's under attendees, you can see a little hand raising feature.
Okay.
Oh, great.
So,
yeah,
thanks.
like
I see. Okay, great. Okay, so people are starting to hear. Okay, great. So, so thank you for engaging in that, and I hope you both enjoyed the text and just thought a little bit about the practice. It's obviously much different in the classroom with paper, with students. But I saw that a lot of you were kind of pulling out, you know, the conflict Jennifer's facing, you know, as she describes the Jennifer clashing with the Wang. With students, we would engage them in that conversation just like in twos. We might even have them start by highlighting or ending, actually highlighting words that describe Jennifer and what she's facing. So we might have them just underline key phrases, key moments from the text. Phrases like the Wang struggling with the Jennifer, even the phrase I hate baseball, and we would have them almost create like a chart or a map of who she's saying she is. And so this would be again in that sort of beginning section, individual and society, where we're getting students to see identity as something complex and see it as something nuanced, and part of that is to get them thinking about themselves and get them thinking about people around them. So we would often then have them go into deeper discussion. So after spending that kind of deep time with the text first in that silent way, we would have a conversation about things like these questions, you know, experiences Jennifer identifies as important to who she is, which of these are having the greatest impact on her identity, and we might even ask them to then push out to themselves what experiences are important to who you are and how you see yourself, which of these experiences have the greatest impact on your identity. I think it's probably clear to many of you that these kinds of things, these kinds of texts that are really just setting the groundwork for the concept of identity and the complexity of it are both to allow your students to see that complexity in themselves and to bring that complexity of self to the classroom, but also to then think, as they're going to be looking at historical figures or figures in literature, to think of them in the same way. But all these things are part of creating that safe space for this kind of dialogue. And so already, as we're talking about Jennifer, we're going to be thinking about her, you know, deeply and having a really deep discussion about what does it mean to be stuck between two worlds, and is it just two worlds, or are there more of these worlds for her, and is she even understanding Chinese and American? You know, she has these boxes that are really separate, and do they have to be separate? We might then, you know, use this text with someone who has a very different interpretation of a biracial identity and how how it feels and sort of talk about them together. And so this is the beginning. Again, this is just an example of the beginning of these kinds of conversations to let students talk together, to begin a culture of questioning, to use silence, to start investigating deep topics. I'm now going to switch over to a different thing, and I'll have to run through it a little bit, but I want to just show you sort of what it looks like when we actually take on the history. So one of our case studies that we do that is one of my favorites is called Choices in Little Rock, and it's a time where we look at the desegregation of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. We focus on the Little Rock Nine, and we and we look at the history of the civil rights movement through that lens. It's a unit we've written for 8th grade students. It's actually one of our most accessible units in terms of the level of text, the readability, and it's just really compelling because it profiles, students in particular. So one thing that we do, and I'm going to skip through a couple of these, is we use essential questions to frame these case studies. So we do this again in this reflective classroom thinking to create these case studies, the case study that's more than just learning about the history of what happened in the 50s in Little Rock, Arkansas, but how does this connect to our lives? How does this connect to the big kind of questions of the world that we want to answer? And also we want to have big picture questions so that there's space for diverse viewpoints. So it's not just an obvious answer. This isn't just a foregone conclusion. Here's the civil rights movement. Let's see how it went. We want to have students have space to talk about different things. So essential questions, have been around in education for many years, but the idea of having these big open-ended questions that are enduring, that really can't be answered with yes or no, can almost never be answered, is something we do to create this kind of a space in the classroom. So these are some of the kinds of questions we might ask students. Who or what changes the world? How does society influence our identity and the choices we make? What does it mean to be from a place? How does where we are from influence who we are? What are civil rights? Who decides? How can we respond when our civil rights are violated? What can be done to strengthen the civil rights of individuals and groups? So one way that we take something big like this, that we hope that students would want to discuss, that would really engage all of us, both emotionally and ethically and intellectually, into a content area, is by doing this. So here's a sort of the what changes the world into a more content form. So we take this very famous quote that I'm sure most of you know from Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And so we would start by having students just respond to that quote. At the beginning of a unit, we're introducing this essential question. What do you think? Do you agree? Is it a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens? Is it not? Why? What does it mean to change the world? Who has the power to create change? And we would just kind of talk about that, really more just sort of our opinions and our thoughts about that. And then to take it down to the content, we'd actually use this quote to then investigate the desegregation of Central High School. So here this is in sort of the standards-based writing prompt form. This is just the prompt. We would have many, many strategies to unpack this with students. We actually have about 40 writing strategies correlated to the standards to help students break down this writing prompt and see it through to a formal essay. But the idea that you take this quote and then say, okay, let's support, refute, or modify this statement based on specific evidence from the history of the civil rights movement. So what that's going to mean in the history we're going to look at in the Little Rock Nine, here's an iconic picture just to remind you of the moment. We're going to look at the experiences of the 9 children. We're going to look at the adults who supported them. We're going to look at the role of the mayor and the principal of the town. We're going to look at the role of the white students. We're going to look at the role of the greater NAACP. We're going to look at the role of the federal government, the role of the state government, the governor who tried to block them from coming into the school, the President Eisenhower who eventually made it so that they could come in, the role of the military who were sent to protect them, the role of the National Guard who were asked to deny them. And look at all these different elements. We're going to look at Brown versus Board, the Supreme Court, and say, okay, based on this historic moment, who or what changes the world? So I'm just going to go back for a second to, oh, sorry, actually, I'll stay forward. So just again to give you a tiny taste of that and to how we might sort of create these moments in the classroom, what our pedagogy sort of looks like. I'm going to ask you to look at this picture. If we had a little more time, I would have you read Elizabeth Eckbert's story of being there this first day of school. This picture is in Little Rock. It's the first day of the Little Rock Nine. We're coming to school, 9 students integrating this high school. And on this day, there had been much controversy about this happening. And on this day, the 9 students were going to come together. But Elizabeth Eckford, the student in the picture, did not actually get the message and ended up arriving at the school alone, and the other 8 came together with adults to help them get into the school. Now, when the 8 other ones came, the Arkansas National Guard was there, sent the governor at the time, Governor Faubus, and they were denied entry. The National Guard, the governor was putting his foot down. It was a case of both state versus federal rights. It was a case of many different things. Of not abiding by Brown versus Board. It's 1957, 3 years after the decision. But those 8 students were denied entry and they were taken home. Elizabeth, in this picture, did not get that far, and when she got there, she met this mob who was around her. And so she was taken actually by a woman and walked to the bus stop to wait for the bus to go home. And this moment, taken by a photographer, a journalist, was kind of frozen in time. So I want you just to look at this picture, just to sort of think, just to again give you a mini experience of our classroom, and say, you know, first of all, what's going on here? But who in this picture would you want to ask a question to, if you could right now? And what would you ask them? When you look at this picture, who would you want to ask a question to, and what would you ask them? And I'd love you to write in the question box if you have some thoughts about that. Who would you ask a question to, and what would you ask them? And I'm going to make this bigger for me. Now okay, so great. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the question box. And if I open it up, does that block your screen or just mine? Hopefully just mine.
Just yours, yep.
Okay, great, thank you. So one person is asking the woman who has that sort of sneering face, the young white woman behind Elizabeth, why are you so angry? Yeah, absolutely. Others, same woman, I think. What do you know about Elizabeth? What do you know about this person? You know, sometimes I find people want to, look at that man. Oops, sorry about that. The man in the back with the hat. What are you doing? Like, why are you here? I've heard that question. Someone saying to the woman on the right, are you going to help her, and how? The man in the white shirt with the black collar, why are you smiling? Yeah, what's going on there? So we freeze moments like this, both again, if you remember sort of the idea of the roles people play, also sort of the emotional engagement piece. When you think of your EL learners, giving them access to this moment. And then also this, thinking of the role of the media here, sort of who's taking this picture and why. And someone did ask Elizabeth a question. I just wanted to call it out, saying, Elizabeth, how do you feel? What does it feel like to be you in the moment? We find this type of learning is both engaging to students and also helpful in creating those moments where you can actually now break down, sort of slow down the history a little bit to think about some of the individual experiences. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole history, but I do want to let you know that the woman with the face, whose name is Hazel Bryan, there's been much written about her. She and Elizabeth have talked. They've reconciled. They've also not reconciled. They've been on Oprah together. It's a long, complicated history, but the idea that she was 15, that she was sort of memorialized as a face of anti-integration at that moment, and what that meant for her, and that also just thinking of the role of the media. So that's just a side note that I just wanted to say. There's actually a whole book written called Elizabeth and Hazel about this moment. Okay, I see a couple more questions and I'm going to address them. I'm just going to take us to the last slide. So this, again, that's just such a short snippet, but just to show you that even that picture is just one more piece of evidence to get them thinking about the small group of thoughtful, committed citizens that can change the world. I've had students go through this unit with this prompt, and they actually cite the mobs, right? That is a small group of committed citizens, maybe not thoughtful, that we're trying to change the world in a negative way, and thinking about the role of groups and the role of that mob. Many of those people who came that day to the school were outsiders. They weren't even from Little Rock, but they had heard on the news this was happening, and they decided to make it it was one of their causes. And so just really thinking about, in the case of this moment, who do we, of course it's always everything, right? It's both the small group, it's the institutions, it's the law. We kind of need all the forces together, but getting students to grapple with it and break it down also gives them more respect, understanding of all the different elements, from institutions to groups, individuals, that make change. So I just saw someone wrote a question about difficult conversations. I'm going to read it because it was a great question, and I want to read it out loud for everybody because I think it may be on many people's minds in this current day and age. So the question was, any suggestions for how teachers position themselves in the classroom when discussing controversial issues such as race, class, particularly when many of our nation's K through 12 teachers are white? Thank you for that question. And that's so much about what it means to create a safe and respectful classroom, right? That you are both understanding who you're talking to, the identities of your students as best you can, and your relationship to them, and also thinking thoughtfully about how to have a safe space so everyone can be safe in those conversations, teachers, students, etc. And all the identities that we don't even see, right? There are identities in our classrooms that are very visible, and there are identities in our classrooms that are not visible, and we don't actually really know what everyone's bringing to the table unless they tell us. And this idea of constructive conversations, constructive dialogue, difficult conversations is very real, and I would think even more real in 2016 than maybe ever. And so sometimes it's just, I just want to break down sort of like, well, why would a conversation be difficult or controversial? What is that? And why are they still worth having? And so if I think of difficult conversations, it's both heavy histories, it's controversial current events, personal triggers, and then issues around identity and issues that bring up violence. For all of these different components of a reflective classroom, sorry about that, we have some strategies on our website that deal with them. So the first one that I would say, based on that question, is the idea of contracting, setting classroom contracts. And really seriously, I think that's something that's gotten a lot of play in education, but it can become almost like a contrived, very, the teacher sort of knows the rules they're going to set, and they're just kind of leading their kids through almost like a pretend exercise to make everyone feel better about starting the year. But really to honestly contract with students and then to recontract and to remind them, and as you get to know your students more and as they get to know each other more, to really deepen that contract with them. And we have strategies about that. Strategies like Big Paper that we did, other strategies about conversation to create many different ways to have diverse viewpoints in a safe and structured way are important. And then we do a lot of things like journaling, and that's a really powerful way, I think, for students to process their thinking, but also for teachers to learn what their students are thinking, and for teachers and students to have that communication with each other so that they can then get to know some of the thoughts in the room. And these are just a few highlights. We've also been writing Facing History. We have a blog called Facing Today, which is at our website here. And we have a variety of different blogs. I feel like we've been posting a couple every week, and just here are these last four are from the last couple weeks. So how to help students see other viewpoints, seeing today's world through the lens of Reconstruction, bringing the beloved community into the classroom, and 8 components of creating a reflective classroom. On there are lots of different strategies to think about how to interact with your teachers, and teachers from teacher to teacher talking about that exact question: how do I engage my students in diverse conversations when I myself might not understand their context. So I recommend going there and looking at those types of things. But also I think it's learning to be honest with your students and to ask questions, right? To be okay with how conversations might go. Someone just suggested Teaching Tolerance, which is a great resource as well. They have guidelines for facilitating difficult conversations. Great. And so from there, I'd love to take other questions. So just kind of, we have about 10 minutes left. Any other questions that you have just about anything I've talked about today, both the reflective classroom elements, the quick examples, thinking about constructive conversations, I'm happy to keep talking. And I have a question right here that I'll read. So it says, since this approach, someone wrote, the approach, I think this person said about the facing history approach, would affect individual classrooms differently. How do you see it being effective in a classroom that isn't so diverse, where students wouldn't necessarily feel an instant affinity to the topic? How do you engage them emotionally? You know, it's interesting. The reason we started this organization, and we started really teaching the Holocaust as our primary case study, was because there were things happening in Boston around school desegregation in Boston that were very violent and very divided. And so a teacher said, you know what, we need to talk about what's happening in our city, but it's too close to home, and so we're going to talk about something else farther away that we're removed from, but has similar issues of we and they, division, membership, exclusion, who am I, how does that affect how you're treating me, how does it affect how I'm treating you, and then we can use those moments to talk about what's happening. And I think in any classroom, being diverse or not, the issues of we and they and division and membership and inclusion and exclusion are always present. They're ever present in the adolescent identity world. They're ever present in any school, and they're definitely getting louder in our country today. And so I think any student can be engaged in these topics, even if it's not there, they may not feel instant connection. And the truth is, I think part of this is that this is all of our history, and part of that is understanding that through looking at nuance and thinking more deeply about what can I learn from you, what can you learn from me, and what can I learn from these histories that may or may not feel directly connected to me. Someone just asked, how do you involve parents in the difficult conversations we have in your classroom? I think that's partly your own context. I mean, some of these conversations, you know, if you're teaching the history of the civil rights movement, I wouldn't assume that parents would need to be, you know, prepared for that, but I don't know your context, and maybe they would. But if, you know, in terms of other conversations, I think it's a case-by-case basis. For some, from parents, they want to, you know, if it's a really difficult history, if it's like an 8th grade classroom learning about genocide, teachers might send a letter home and give parents a chance to, you know, I've heard parents like opting out of watching Schindler's List, if that's something that, you know, parents need to know about or need to be able to weigh in on. But I think you know your context well. I would assume that many of you are already having relatively difficult conversations in their classroom at different times, and so I think it's up to you to sort of know what your context is and what you'll need. But being in conversation with parents is always a great idea. Another question on different is what's the difference between an open-ended question and an essential question? Could you provide an example or two? Yeah, I think an essential question, the difference is that it's going to be sort of the framework for your unit, and it's going to maybe even be something you can spend your whole year on. That when I think of essential questions in my classroom, I don't know the answer to it, so I'm not going to direct all of my evidence and all of my teaching towards one or the other, right? So if the question is, I can't think of an example, but if you sort of know where you're going, if all of the things you're going to teach them there's going to be a foregone conclusion that the way to achieve change is through the court system or something, then that, even though it seems like an open-ended question, what is the way to achieve change? If you know the answer, it sort of makes it less of it wouldn't really be an essential question. I think, I just think an essential question, the weight of it's different because it's usually about like a pretty key thinking about humanity, the world. I'm trying to think of what would just be a plain open-ended question that I would ask that I wouldn't call essential. It's really more how you orient it to your unit and to your teaching is really the way that it gets distinguished for me. And you know, there's a ton of stuff written on this in Understanding by Design by Grant Wiggins about, you know, essential questions and how to write them and how to create them and link them to assessments. There's lots on that. One more question I see is when doing activities such as the silent conversation in a classroom with English learners, what accommodations? Great. So for the silent conversation, I would have them give them a chance to actually see the text first by themselves, react to it by themselves first, and then give them a chance to write silently, so they've already kind of practiced their thinking and their writing. If writing is too stressful, like if they don't want to make their actual physical writing public, I probably wouldn't do the silent conversation. I would give them a chance to process the text individually, and then I would have them let them talk first if talking feels safer for them. And then I might even go from talking to the silent conversation, right? So give them another step where they're actually practicing their thinking even more. Or I might have a word bank or things they can pull from if they're worried about spelling or things like that. You know, I think often my accommodations are to do the same strategies, but to do them, give students more safety in practicing in smaller groups first. So, you know, we often want to do things like a whole group Socratic seminar, but I would be more likely to really start with, you know, a paired conversation and then maybe work towards a conversation between 4 students, and then really with maybe the ultimate goal being a full class discussion, but really giving the safety of steps and of audience, that, you know, the bigger the audience, usually the more anxiety producing it can be. And I also give them a ton of sentence starters for discussions. So, and I do that for all my students because they all need it. You know, how do you agree with someone? How do you disagree with someone? What's a way to ask someone to phrase something differently? What's a way to say, that actually offended me? And I would give them, I usually have up on my board or on my wall or on cards in front of them, different ways that they can enter the conversation. So that they're not focusing on how to say it, but they're really focusing on what they want to say. I hope that's helpful. I think we have just a couple more minutes, so I'd love, in case anyone else wants to say something, I'll take your question. But I want to just say thank you so much for joining us. I hope this was helpful to you and gave you some ideas to think about. Definitely visit our website. We have, you know, many teaching strategies, and I know Cal has lots of options and ideas as well. And really the point, the Facing History is not sort of a place where you can kind of go and you get your 3 ideas and it's, you know, you're done. It's really sort of like an uncovering of many different ideas and philosophy and strategy. So we'd love to be in conversation with you, and we'd love to sort of keep sharing ideas with you. And we really see teaching as a journey that takes a long time. So anyone else before we sign off?
Yeah, I don't see anything else coming through, so we can close out. We're just about a minute to anyway. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for sharing with us today. I found this incredibly useful and interesting, and I hope all of you did too. We just wanted to thank you again for sharing your expertise with us today, and thank you for everyone, to everyone who took the time to participate. It was great to have some interactivity and hear some of your thoughts about the text. I really enjoyed seeing everybody's perspective, so we really appreciate you taking the time here on a hot day, depending on where you are in the end of July. We hope it's been helpful to you, and we'd like to extend one final invitation to continue to connect and collaborate with us and your fellow educators on Education Connections. You can reach out to our team anytime at edconnect@cal.org if you have questions about the webinar, the community, or anything else. The website is there, as well as the Twitter handles, both for our Education Connections team as well as for Facing History, and we hope you're able to find some useful new ideas both from us as well as from Facing History, and we're very excited to be able to partner with them and do some work together, bringing together our various approaches. So thank you again, Jocelyn, and to everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.